Some call it art, others call it vandalism.
Whatever your view is on graffiti, it is against the law.
Graffiti can be a lot more than just ugly vandalism. It might also be a death trap.
It's definitely an adrenaline rush. It's better than any high.
Anything that they can get their hands on to vandalize, they will.
You see it all over the city. What some call art, police say is a crime. Painting an ugly picture from street signs to vacant buildings, graffiti taggers are not picky about the canvas.
Some may call it vandalism while others call it art. Graffiti has existed since ancient times, with examples dating back to ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and the Roman Empire. It expresses underlying social and political messages. Even gangs use it to mark their territory or to indicate their activities. But how did it make its way into South Africa? And where in South Africa can we see the most interesting graffiti? This time on Quintessential Talks, we talk to Joe Buitendach.
I think, there's different types of graffiti, but I think the need to leave your mark somewhere is not a new concept. So before I did what I'm doing now, I was actually an archaeologist, and I concentrated on rock art. So I think that humans have always had the need to leave their mark, whether it's on the back of a bathroom door, like for a good time call, that sort of scratching sort of stuff, or whether it's something more like Pompeii that's, very old. But the graffiti subculture started in New York in the late 1960s.
She runs a business called Past Experiences, which offers a wide variety of city tours in Johannesburg, Soweto, and Pretoria. Jo did her master's degree in the heritage value of graffiti in South Africa.
I've been running the tour company for about 8 years, and I do lots of other tours, but the graffiti tours are the babies, the love project. But I did my master's in the value of political graffiti. So I really spent about 4 years of my life also studying. I've been studying graffiti. And then all the graffiti tours are done in conjunction with a lot of the Johannesburg graffiti artists. So it is really that we're very passionate about it.
Coming up, Jo will talk to us about the misconceptions of graffiti, who the local artists are, and how graffiti is closely linked with South Africa's heritage and its modern day politics. What are the current misconceptions that we have about graffiti today, based on where it started and where it is today? What are the misconceptions?
I think people generally, people know the term graffiti. They know it's the stuff on the wall. They don't really understand what it is. They don't really often, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people don't understand what the subculture is. They don't understand where it comes from. They also, people often say to me, oh, this is so beautiful. It's street art. It's not graffiti.
Yeah, that's actually a question I have. What is the difference between street art and what is the difference between that and graffiti?
So a lot of, everybody does this differently, by the way. So one of the big graffiti artists in Joburg thinks there's no such thing as street art. He thinks it's all graffiti. Whereas some of the other graffiti artists who are very traditional in their thought, they think if you call them a street artist, they get really irritated. So how I divide it on tours, but as I said, everyone's a little bit different, is that graffiti is the subcultural stuff. The graffiti artists believe in a specific thing. They do tags, they do throw-ups, they follow sort of rules in a way. They really believe in it. Whereas to me, street art is things like stickers, stencils, something called wheat paste, which is a bit like wallpaper, little figurines. And there's a guy in overseas who does chewing gum that he presses down and paints on it and varnishes it. It could be mural-style work. It's got a very different feel to it. Sometimes things are, you're not quite sure where they fit in. Also, street art to me often, not always, but often has a message. So it could be political, and it can be often, quite a bit of it can be done in a studio. So you could print it out, you could come up with them, you could create something on a computer, print it out, stick it on a wall, and then it could have a message. It could have a repeated image. And then, things that I always think Banksy's a street artist. He's not a graffiti artist. But what I also do say on my tours, in my opinion, is it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's art and it's outside and it's not in a gallery, which I also do like, but it's that it's art outside for everyone to enjoy, whatever your background, however much money you have. It's for everybody.
Going on these graffiti tours is also apparently very eye-opening. Here's a review from someone who tagged along on one of the walks.
It opened up a whole new world for me. I was just going in with the idea, I'm just going to get some Instagram photos, but I came home with more than that. I went on a journey to the past, to the present day, and I was blown away. I didn't realize how crucial graffiti, street art, and that subculture is to communities. And it's only there where you realize Those walls are the classrooms for the kids living there, also for the people passing by.
Does it all start with tagging in terms of graffiti? Does it all start with tagging and then go on from there? Because, I mean, obviously, a lot of graffiti artists will say, you know, if I didn't begin tagging, I probably wouldn't have graduated to like a mural spray painting artist. So, in terms of the famous graffiti artists we have in South Africa, did they start as taggers? Are they currently still doing tagging in South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, tagging, obviously some people don't like it because it's on their property or they just don't get it. Personally, just as a background, I do think Johannesburg city centre, which is what I specialise in, I don't really do the suburbs. The city centre, the tagging suits it, it's beautiful, it's like a pattern, it's like fabric all over the walls, it's interesting. But yeah, tagging is a huge part of it. I really love tags. I think they're beautiful. I think that not every tag is equal. Some are more beautiful than others. You can see when a kid is starting out too, when someone's like a real master at it. Something like Taps. People know who Taps is because he tags everything in Joburg, but the Taps tag is beautiful. There's different ones. But yeah, so everyone is different. I can't answer a question for every graffiti artist because everyone has got a different idea. People do it for different reasons. But most graffiti artists will start tagging and they will continue tagging. So it doesn't matter how good they get. There is probably an element of tagging still to what they do, even if they are older, even if they are quite well known. I'm not saying everybody, but most.
So in terms of, moving towards a legalized system of it, because obviously, like you said, tagging is something where sometimes it's private property and it's quite destructive in that nature. But in terms of creating a business for these artists to actually express themselves, how are you involved in creating a business culture around graffiti?
Well, some people won't agree with what I do. Some people will. I've got a number of graffiti artists who do work for past experiences. So my company, they do tours, specifically Bias and Mars. We also there is a couple of people who do workshops. One specifically, an artist called Werner, who has a company called The Talking Vandal. He does graffiti workshops, so we give him a lot of work. We really support him in what he does. But, some graffiti artists don't want to make money out of this. It is their passion. They have a job on the side. They'll be a tattoo artist, or they'll be a graphic designer, or they could be anything, And so some people don't want to make a business, but some people do want to make money out of the thing they love, and so we try and help. I get an email maybe once a week asking for someone to do a mural in a business, or, it could be Nando's or Standard Bank or a company like that, and they want to get big works done in their office. So we have a list of graffiti artists that we send their names out. They can then be contacted. We don't take a cut of it or anything. Any graffiti artist can go on the list if they want to email me as well. And then people can go from there. We don't call that graffiti. We call that graffiti-inspired art. But and the graffiti artists also wouldn't call it graffiti. But yeah, so I think that there is a way to make money out of it. But I think that graffiti artists will always, in their spare time and as their passion part of it, will always go back to tagging and the subculture. And I think that's the best part of it. And that's what attracts a lot of people to it, is that it is a little bit on the edge. It isn't, it is a bit off-center, and a lot of people like that sort of thing.
Give us free education, that's what we want in South Africa. That is what they promised us as the ANC in 1994.
Then you get the flip side where, say, for example, because we're on a campus, then, protest graffiti becomes a thing where these things are graffitied onto walls and you kind of see a political message. In terms of the studying that you've done, how instrumental has graffiti been in the South African heritage story?
I think very important. Graffiti, and this is, my master's actually focused on one particular site more than anything else, but did look at case studies around the world and talked about graffiti in general here, but it looked at Constitution Hill No. 4 prison in Johannesburg. It was a prison that held all the black prisoners, gangsters and hardened criminals, but liberation, struggle heroes as well. And the isolation cells are full of political graffiti done in sort of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. It's all engraved on the back of the doors, and it's never really got any light and any attention. There have been some photos taken of it. They do talk about it in the museum, but it's very limited because of budget. And so I really try to show that how important graffiti is. Because political graffiti, which is very different to the subculture, is really a voice for people with no voice, I think. And you can see that in Palestine, you can see it in Northern Ireland, the peace walls back in the day. But here, when I wrote my thesis, there was no political graffiti around the city. There was one example that said, remember Marikana, but that was it. And then subsequently, with the Fees Must Fall campaign at Wits, Braamfontein, which is the surroundings in the city area, is full of political graffiti. It's very sort of black consciousness movement-based graffiti. It's by an organization called Black Thought. And I think it's incredibly important because you shouldn't hide the problems of society, you should show them. And for those students who really feel very disenfranchised, I think that is their voice.
So you're saying it's as important as it was back then today?
Exactly. I mean, if you look historically, a very famous example, because the stuff in the prison there aren't famous examples, but probably one of the most famous examples of political graffiti was in Sophiatown in the 50s when they were removing the people during the forced removals, which said, as someone had just written in paint on the wall, "We won't move." And so that's a very important example of it. So, I mean, I think there are examples. The prison at Constitution Hill is just fantastic for it. I mean, I just concentrated on a few pieces. One said, Africa, My Beginning, My Ending, which is from a Black Power poem. One said Nina Simone, because a lot of her music was very influenced by the Black Power movement in America. And so, these little examples, and you can use those to show the thought. Prison records are very dry. They just say who was there and for what and what for. But graffiti, like in the prisons, are really someone's emotions that you're showing. It's a very emotional sort of thing.
So what is your verdict about graffiti? Is it a vehicle for change, or is it just ugly pictures spray painted on a wall? Are there opportunities with graffiti in South Africa? Or should we abolish graffiti altogether?
This changes the perception you have of this culture, and many people don't realize it, but that graffiti attracts tourists, and those tourists buy food or buy products in that area, boosting the economy of those small towns. And Joe's Tours, it's an amazing concept, and I wish there could be more of those things opening up South Africans' minds and perceptions of the things they think they know, right?
But what would you say to the critics of graffiti? Because, there's going to be a lot of people who will SMS us and tell us, how much the government actually spends painting over graffiti in areas where it was done illegally. What would you say to the critics of graffiti?
Well, I always say the world would be a boring place if we all liked the same thing. So everyone's allowed their opinion, and on the tours it's quite nice to have someone that isn't aggressive, but wants to have a debate. Not everybody likes tagging. I get that. So different strokes for different folks, but I would say go on a graffiti tour or start reading about it, just so that when you do look at it, at least you have a different perspective of what it is. There's always going to be people, especially people who own buildings. I do understand that if it's your building, but as I always say, my interest is the Joburg in the city's graffiti, and it's a very different place and a very different canvas from like the suburbs. And the people of the inner city, in a lot of the lower socioeconomic areas, love the graffiti because they can't afford to paint their houses, and the graffiti artists often paint the buildings for them. So there's a real discussion around it as well that a lot of people will never understand unless they can get into the city centres and meet the communities and meet the graffiti artists, I suppose, just see what they're doing. But of course there's always an illegal vandalism aspect to it as well.